This presentation will give you a high-level overview of the types of publications encountered in research. While research mentors and experts intuitively know these distinctions, new research students often choose poor or bad resources, and we don't want you to make that mistake when you start your research. So this diagram is going to be repeated throughout the presentation, and I want to emphasize that when you try to classify publications, it's kind of squishy, and different publications can fall in different categories, all depending on the type of publication you're looking at. So whether it's digital or print, what we've done is sorted it by kind of the broad categories we've used before to classify different types of research and the types of publications that might fall within these categories. We're going to cover a few examples of publications you may not be as familiar with. A key mistake we want to stop new researchers from doing is we don't want you to read summaries and report those in your research project. In research, you always want the original research report or data set. You rarely want to repeat someone else's summary, except maybe in the context of business or industry research internships where that might be accepted practice. You may read summaries to help you out, but you need to get used to reading to learn and not just reading it because it's something worth citing, which is a common mistake to new researchers, which is they think they only need to read something if they're going to cite it in the references. And you have to get used to you need to read it just so you can be more intelligent on the topic you're researching. Kind of the opposite of what you shouldn't do, an expectation of researchers is that you must read to learn at all levels of these research publications. So not only do you have to get better at reading peer-reviewed scholarly research, which can be quite difficult to read, but you may need to read a lot in the area of informal research and even in popular media, simply so you can help understand the words used in some of the scholarly research to the ideas presented, that you can't simply have a very high-level academic scholarly article thrown at you and you be able to interpret it without you starting to read some of the more basic material that kind of falls in this middle ground. And it'll be clear to your research mentor whether you're making the effort to, on your own to read in depth to get to know the topic, or whether you're just reading the bare minimum, perhaps what they've specifically told you to read. So this is a huge shift from what student expectations are in the traditional classroom in high school or early undergraduate, where you only read what the teacher tells you to read. If you do anything extra, you expect a gold star or extra credit. So in a research environment, it's expected that you're motivated to, on your own, go find and read the background information you need to understand the expert literature that your mentor is asking you to read, or just simply to understand the hands-on project that you're working on in your research. So before we jump into defining the publications and going back to that diagram, I'm going to emphasize again and again that reading or summarizing an article without answering these 4 questions is what a robot can do, and you're smarter than a vacuum cleaner. So new researchers often fall flat by reading an article that's a bad fit for the research question, often because they're clueless on what they're reading. They never bother to think through these 4 questions when they pick the article to read. So unfortunately, trying to find the best article to read for a research question is something that sometimes you only can find out from getting a set of literature from a researcher or a librarian to figure out what you should be reading. And one tool that you can use yourself is to check the citations and to read what literature is cited at the end of the publication. And that'll give you a hint of whether this is a very scholarly, in-depth article or a very general article aimed at the broad community of researchers by looking at how specific the citations are, and that might be a good place to find a very general, broad overview of the problem you're working on just by looking at the titles of the citations. So stepping through these quickly, who published it? And what was their motive or reason for publishing? So do they publish scholarly articles? Is it a trade organization that has a publication? You have to know who published this item in the first place to make sure you're not reciting something that is an opinion piece or bad research. You need to understand the credentials of who wrote it, whether what you're reading is just their opinion or based or informed on their research. It's not always clear if it's been peer-reviewed. Experts can tell. It doesn't always say in the publication, hey, this has been peer-reviewed, and even if it does, it might be buried within the document. Learning from research and librarians that you're reading the right type of research literature is most important, and finally knowing what type of research it represents. If you're doing a project at a business, informal and formal research is great. If you're doing something in a biology lab, then it's probably going to be only accepted that you're reading scholarly literature. So again, this diagram is a generalization of a lot of publications that are out there, and what I want to do is to focus on a few of the types of presentations or publications that are on here and step through how they fit into doing research. I'm going to start off with trade professional media first. And before I do that, to go with that generalization, I'm going to point out just because something looks peer-reviewed and scholarly and academic doesn't mean it is. It's a common trick that some people have a specific opinion or bias, especially if it involves something that involves political or business decision-making, may make it look like it's peer-reviewed to give it that academic halo effect it doesn't deserve. And on the flip side, sometimes researchers will publish peer-review work meant for the general public. So it's just for the general public to understand. It'd be great for you to get some background knowledge, but it's probably not appropriate to actually cite within a research project because while peer-reviewed, written by an expert, content was generalized for the general public and wouldn't be appropriate to cite in advanced research. So jumping to some examples of trade and professional publications, Chemical and Engineering News is a publication aimed at a very broad community of chemists and engineers, so anyone with a very basic background would be able to understand. The goal is not necessarily to present original research, but to summarize what innovation is going on in these industries. Its advertising age is mostly aimed at people working in industry of marketing and advertising, and it again summarizes different trends and tools and informal and formal research going on in the advertising industry. A few more examples. This one, published by UNC Press, falls firmly within the field of humanities and features essays. So that might be where some academics do some publication based on their area of interest, but it's also kind of a trade and professional publication on a broad variety of people, just not those working in universities that have an interest in Southern culture. Another example, Stack Exchange, which is kind of a Q&A community. If you're doing a comp sci internship, that would be the type of place you would go to if you're trying to solve a problem in a business internship environment. If you were doing comp sci research at one of the universities, probably not the appropriate place you'd go to if you were looking for original research. And this journal in the middle here kind of represents all three. It has scholarly articles, it has photo essays, and it has opinion pieces. So again, it's kind of squishy of where these different trade and professional publications land because they can have a mixture of everything on our publication spectrum, going from opinion to scholarly research. So remember, one key difference is when you do research in business industry environment, you rarely are going to read scholarly academic articles, and you're going to be doing more of your work in these professional publications. Next area I want to jump into is the documents in purple. So technical papers often represent formal research, may be peer-reviewed, but have a focus to solve a narrow one-time issue or problem, often to help industry or government decision makers. This first example also highlighting our citation information that we always want to answer: who wrote it, who published it, was it peer-reviewed, does it represent original work. This is an environmental impact report on a little ferry that sits within Mammoth Cave National Park. Department of Interior published it. It's like a 50 to 70 page document that contains original research to make a recommendation on whether the ferry should be replaced. There are a lot of these working technical publications that may help you understand the application of a field of study. Depending on the type of research you're doing, scholars might reference this document. Working professionals might reference this document, depends on their research question. Another example on the side of engineering is what causes Boeing 737 to crash. So the research question being what caused the plane to crash. Who published it? Who was the author? How was it peer-reviewed? Doesn't contain original research. So again, depending on the type of problems you're working on, you might read a publication like this just to build up your background knowledge on a topic. The value of scholarly textbooks is going to depend on the context. Scholarly textbooks are always valuable as a place for you to learn more about a specific field of study because they're one level up in the amount of technical lingo they're going to have compared to the scholarly articles that are going to relate to the field of study the textbook is on. So when it comes to the natural sciences, it's less likely that you're going to actually cite a textbook in formal research in a business or industry setting. It is normal to read and cite from textbook information, but natural sciences, it's more something you're reading to become a better expert at the particular topic. But it all depends on what the research area is in. So in the humanities and social sciences, it's more normal that academic scholars publish in book format instead of scholarly peer journals, including this example published by a Duke professor. Both these books are published by Oxford University Press. Notice that one does say textbook. This one that's on the screen now does not say textbook, so it doesn't always say textbook, but both can be considered scholarly academic books. It will depend on your particular research project on whether it's an acceptable item to cite in your research. Finally, you may be familiar with posters, abstracts, and presentations from high school and undergraduate research conferences and symposia. So you'll see this kind of lands in informal to formal research. They do represent research in progress, and typically in the research community, what they present in posters and abstracts and presentations will lead into what becomes a higher level scholarly research paper that has the final conclusion on the research in progress. So this example, which is pulled from a Society for Research in Childhood Development, is a conference proceedings. Most of these are going to show up in scholarly searches when you're researching databases to find articles, and that's where students often make a mistake, is they will pull up a scholarly article. All that is there is an abstract, and that's it. That's all that was ever published. And that's why these aren't quite the appropriate places to be going when you're trying to get your start in research. There are particular research questions and fields where you might cite from these as you're working in depth on a research project, but it's not a good starting point. So these can contain 1,000 abstracts to hundreds of abstracts from many different research collaborators. In this case, the publisher is a society that supports scholarly research, but often they don't contain citations and have very limited peer review because it represents, again, ideas in progress. And you're more likely to find posters and presentations through a Google search. They're not going to show up in a scholarly research database. Those would just contain the abstract. But again, this example is from Council for Undergraduate Research. This particular poster was presented at an event in Raleigh. And again, it's just a very short overview of someone's particular research project during an academic year, but not the type of place we want to go looking for the broader knowledge in the scholarly community on their particular research question. We would look to see, did they publish these ideas in a final format in a peer-reviewed scholarly publication. So what we want to emphasize when you read, item number 1 here is what we had earlier, that you must always be able to answer these questions, and if you can't, it indicates that you really don't understand what you read. Going further, when you start reading on your own, you have to understand who was the attendant audience, because that's a clue that you are not reading the appropriate type of literature. You need to be able to answer why you read it. How does it relate to your research question? You need to understand how does it relate to other publications I've read. So if you do, say, read an abstract as part of your research, you need to show how that plugs in with some other scholarly articles you're reading. So if you are an informed researcher, it's not just I skimmed the article and I wrote a quick abstract. Not only do you have to understand the article, you have to understand this entire context of why you read the article.